or comprehend the kind of poetry that Eliot wrote. To some extent, he used symbols, and those symbols he had acquired from the French symbols, which did not much impact or did not make much sense to the English sensibilities of the readers. Eliot's attempt with obscurity, this is something which really made people understand poetry tough. They did not enjoy reading poetry of T.S. Eliot. I mean, light-minded people could not really comprehend what T.S. Eliot was trying to say. So it was not for anybody to understand T.S. Eliot's poems, but there was a lot of content in his writing, content with regard to the kind of problems which had generated due to the wars, World War I and World War II, in between, the kind of tensions that were mounting in the people of the age. So we discussed two major poets, Hopkins and T.S. Eliot, because when we are studying the literary characteristics, we need to understand who exactly were the writers who were directly representative of that age. Then we come to W.H. Auden, who wrote again differently. How was W.H. Auden different from the conventional poets? Due to the World War scenarios, due to the disturbances, due to the upheavals that were very much evident in the society, the kind of poems that W.H. Auden wrote were very noisy. You could see a noisy jazziness in his writing, in a cynically satirical vein depicting the hollowness of disintegrating civilization. Now, in his own words, which he calls as a time of crisis and dismay, it was a problem period. People were having problems because of the war. There was unemployment, there was depression, there was hopelessness, there was all kind of sorrowful scenarios around in the society. But at the same time, you can also, due to this war, you could also find that there was a disintegration in the civilization and the hollowness of the people who were living. So it's a time of crisis and dismay, which was reflected in the poetry of W.H. Auden. So the novels and poetry which predominated this particular age had different kinds of writers who tried to write in their own way. They tried to experiment with the forms. They tried to bring in change in the writing. They tried to offer something new to the readers. Now, the poetry also had different kinds of changes. Amongst the hopelessness, there is also it's a duty of the poet to give hope for a brave new world through the writings. So writers can also bring about change in the mindset of the people through the writings. They can rather convince their readers that a change is bound to happen, a change for the better. These kinds of hopes were instilled in the readers. A new world is going to be emerged. There is a hope of a new world that's going to be emerged. You can also find the developments in poetic techniques, the difficulty of modern poetry, the complex problems that you see in the society which were reflected in the poetry. Modern poetry was not easy to comprehend. They were not as simple as the lyrical poetries, the romantic poetries, which were written. There was a lot of obscure feelings expressed through the poetries, which was beyond the comprehension of a common person. The other changes that you could find, even in the poetry, similar to what you found in the novels written by D.H. Lawrence or James Joyce or Virginia Woolf, you'll find that internal monologues. This was the effect of the influence of psychology. As I said, the psychology field had developed to such an extent that it had begun to impact the writing styles of the authors of that period. So internal monologue was incorporated into the writings. Surrealism is something new, which it's a new kind of ism which came into existence. Now, what is surrealism? We are all aware of realism, that which is real, that which is realistic, which is clearly being depicted in the literature of that period. But surrealism is something which gives some kind of a hope, not actually discussing or depicting the problems, the complex problems that were existent in the society of the time. The writers tried to escape from those problems by creating a different utopian world which brought about lots of hope amongst the people. There were expectations also which were visible in the writings. Quest for stability. As there was this war scenario happening, the period between the two world wars had lot of unstable moments in the lives led by the people and the writers of the time. So the quest was for stability. In an unstable world, it is the stability that they look for, and they try to find solutions through didactic verses. Now, what do you mean by didactic? Didactic means which teaches you something, which preaches you something. So these kinds of verses which were written, where you found the internal monologues which were used, there was surrealism and there was quest for stability. But at the same time, you also found that the didactic verses did try to preach and teach people how they need to not lose hope, how they need to be positive, how they need to expect good things happen. So we come to the next slide. If you can have a look at the monitor, you will find that with cinema, drama was outstripped. People had stopped going to the theatres. Who would want to see those live performances when much more experimentation was done in the world of cinema, and the film was shown to people through in a different way, in a different angle. So definitely when theatre was not used to that extent in order to entertain the people, the condition of these theatres started deteriorating. There was a decline of realism. This is the effect of surrealism, escaping from the tensions, from the real world. So therefore you will find that not all the works were really depicting the world of that period. Popularity of history play came into existence. Because history played a major role, there were a lot of things happening behind the scene, and therefore those events became the center stage, became the theme, the subject of the various forms that were used, be it poetry or novel. And as I said earlier, the theatre or the drama did not really come up during this period. They suffered a lot. But then there was one different kind of drama which came into existence. That was the expressionist drama, where you will find symbolic features or figures being used in the play, the secret impulses being revealed through these plays. Now, before we conclude the session, I would definitely like to summarize today's lecture so that you have a clear view of the entire literary feature of this period. When we talk about the literary feature of the interwar period, what we generally come to know is that the 2 years are very, very important. The World War I started in 1914, ended in 1918. So from 1918 onwards to 1939, when the World War II began, the period between these two wars, lot of political upheavals which we mentioned earlier took place, and these kind of upheavals definitely impacted the literature of this period. Therefore, you will find that a lot of experimentation took place. The major novelists who brought about these experimentations were D.H. Lawrence, Virginia Woolf, James Joyce. This is just to summarize. We also talk about the poetry, which was also impacted to a great extent. The poets who believed in obscure kind of writing, so it was not meant for normal readers. Not everybody could comprehend what these poets were trying to say. W.H. Auden, T.S. Eliot were some of the prominent poets. We also discussed Hopkins and their style of writing, how they tried to experiment with the forms, the techniques, the style. So we can say that the tensions that were being mounted on the people of the country were reflected through the literature of the period, and these were brought to the readers in different ways. We did discuss about the radio and the cinema, which were some major feature which had impacted the literature of that period, because when no new thing is exposed or given to the audience, the old takes a backseat. So reading had actually suffered when radio and cinema, the two inventions, did predominantly took charge during this period. Therefore, people watched cinema instead of theatre, so theatre also suffered during this period. You'll find the experimentation in novel by James Joyce, D.H. Lawrence and Virginia Woolf, which we discussed at length. What kind of experimentations that they brought about. Stream of consciousness, one of the major development in the field of literature of this period, was also discussed. Thank you.
Sandhan, All Gujarat Integrated Classroom.
સેટેલાઇટના માધ્યમથી જોડતી કડી એટલે સંધાન.